Well, good evening.
Good evening.
It is good to be back after I missed Sunday because of illness. I never did feel particularly ill, but I had a cough that stole my voice for about 3 or 4 days completely, and then it's been a little slow coming back. I had one of my patented coughing fits at school today, where I kind of lose my voice for a little bit and had to, well, those poor kids didn't get their full math lesson today, and they were distraught. I tell you, devastated over the fact that I just couldn't keep talking. So we'll see how it goes. If I need to pass the figurative or literal baton off here, if I start coughing, you got all the notes.
All right, here we go.
So there we go. So you finished John last week. Well done. Well done. And that was a great study. I enjoyed that. It was I enjoyed that we got to do that. We didn't have just a timeline imposed upon us. Thank you for that, and not making us just rush through stuff and being able to take the time and go through that. I don't know that we'll necessarily do that with every book that we do, where we just wander through the book, so to speak, and take every detour that we can find. But it was fun to do that with John. So tonight we start Daniel, and there are handouts, I think, available at the back. If you came in and didn't see one of those, I assume on the table back there, some things that will get you through the notes for today. So why are we doing Daniel right now? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my question is,
okay, question.
If the rulers that we live under today, if they are in fact ungodly, how are we as Christians to act when the pagan leadership, how are we as Christians to respond? Can we still be, how does a godly person live in a time when the leaders do not obey Christ, do not obey God? And I think Daniel is going to answer that. Daniel is literally, the entire book is pointing out, and we'll get into lots and lots of other things, but the book of Daniel is pointing out the fact that, hey, here are a couple of wise Israeli men that were able to live faithfully and walk faithfully with their God, even when they were captives, even when every move that they made was very, very heavily scrutinized, and if they did the wrong thing, they were utterly, I mean, many times throughout the book, it's like, oh yeah, if you don't do what I tell you, you die, and they still ended up doing what God wanted.
Yeah, or if the outcome of this situation that I'm forcing you into doesn't come out in a favorable way for me, you die. And so yeah, there's a lot of faith represented in the book of Daniel, a lot of trust that Daniel displays towards God, and just being able to commit to doing the right thing and trusting that it's going to work out okay if you do the right thing at every opportunity. So that's a great perspective and a great kind of introductory thought for us as we get into the book, and we're going to do some introductory stuff tonight. Kind of historical stuff surrounding the book and some of those things, and then really get into the text next week, hopefully. And I'll be flying home from Texas next Wednesday, so I won't be here Wednesday night. But so we may not spend a ton of time actually in the book of Daniel tonight, but doing some things kind of around Daniel as we look at some of the things that surround the events that shape the book of Daniel, if you will. But it's good to have a perspective of things. Okay, here's what we need to look for, and the reason that Daniel was kind of chosen as the next book that we would go into. We always try to do kind of Old Testament, New Testament. So having just finished John, we were looking for an Old Testament book that we could use, and with our emphasis on the Spirit this year, we felt like Daniel provides an opportunity for us to talk about how God leads His people. And we're talking about how the Spirit leads us as God's people today. And so how does the Spirit lead Daniel and his companions and the nation through the things that they're facing? And what does that mean for us? How does God lead us through the things that we face today? So there's a lot of parallelism there that we'll be able to take from that, I think. Okay, so let's jump into some things, and we're going to have a lot of maps tonight. I'm sure there'll be maps worked in throughout the lessons as we go as we go forward. But we're going to look at kind of this region tonight, which this is not a great map, but I liked it because it has three big words on it. Well, several big words, but the three big words that we're really look at tonight are Jerusalem, Babylon, and Nineveh, to kind of give you a kind of a mind's eye, or a what do they call it? A bird's eye. That's what I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking. Bird's eye image of kind of where things are at in relation to one another. And so we're going to be talking a lot about those three places tonight, and then primarily Jerusalem and Babylon as we move forward through the book of Daniel, and then some other places as well. But Nineveh will play a key feature, or a key part of tonight's lesson. So let's start just kind of parsing our way through this timeline, and you will not be tested on this later, but it is important, and I think perhaps, I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying this, but I think maybe more so than any other book of the Bible, having a clear understanding of the time frame in which Daniel is doing his prophesying, and a timeline, having an understanding of the timeline of events that Daniel prophesies about is key. I mean, there are some things in the Bible that you can kind of read through, and the fact that we don't really know the location and we don't really know the dates doesn't take away too much from our understanding or what we can glean from the story. But then there are things like the book of Daniel, where if you don't have some understanding or reference for what those images and that imagery and things that he's talking about, if you don't understand what that stuff is pointing to, the story really loses a lot of its meaning. And so this might be a handy little reference to keep on hand, even as we get into some of the later chapters of Daniel, where those prophecies really begin to come out, chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, where some of those specific prophecies about future kingdoms come into play. So this timeline is not just there to take up half a page of notes. It's there because these are the things that shape the book of Daniel. And without these historical events, the things that Daniel says and does kind of loses a lot of meaning. So we'll start with the year 625, the death of Ashurbanipal. And Ashurbanipal, I don't know if I say any of these names right, by the way, but that's the way I'm going to say it. Ashurbanipal was the king of Assyria. And Assyria, if you remember back to our study of Isaiah over the last year, Assyria was a big thing. Assyria was the big kid on the block for a couple of hundred years. It was the Assyrian Empire that destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. It was because of Assyria and a king named Sennacherib that there was no more northern kingdom. And so the fact that we're talking about the destruction or the end of the Assyrian Empire plays a vital snapshot in the history of the development of God's own people, because there had been a lot of interaction between the Assyrians and God's people over the centuries. And so at that moment in time when Ashurbanipal dies, Nabopolassar, who is the father of the king that we know from the book of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, Nabopolassar declares himself king of Babylon. And so Babylon, if you go back to the last map, Babylon was a vassal state of Assyria, just like Israel was, just like Egypt was, just like Moab was, just like the Hittites were, the Canaanites, the Philistines. Everybody was a vassal state of Assyria at that time. Assyria was in charge of everything. And so Babylon was one of those really little more than a tribal outpost before the death of Ashurbanipal, and Nabopolassar declares himself king over that region. Once he does that, he begins gathering and amassing other tribes that surround him into an army that can take on what remains of the Assyrian army. And so this takes place over the next 10 or 12 years or so. And then by the year 614, Nebuchadnezzar, who Nabopolassar is still alive at that time, but as his son and as his heir, Nabopolassar has appointed Nebuchadnezzar as the leader of his armies. And Nabopolassar, so I need to go on to this one. Nebuchadnezzar leads his armies against Assyria, and Nineveh falls. And so here we get into a little better maps. I don't know if you can see them very well, but to it covers a lot of area, but you can see Nineveh, which is, I thought that had a button on it. That button? There we go. Nineveh's right there. Was the capital of Assyria. Where do we know Nineveh from? Jonah. Jonah first prophesied in Nineveh in the 8th century, about 735 to 755 BC. Sometime in that time frame is when we would place Jonah, having gone, got swallowed by the big fish or whatever it was, and he gets sent on to Nineveh. He preaches to Nineveh. Nineveh repents, and so God relents of his vow to destroy Nineveh. And it's only because of Jonah's preaching at that time that Nineveh still remains to this day. And so had Nineveh not repented, they would have been wiped out 100 years earlier. But because they repented, they were allowed an extra 100 years. Nahum writes about 100 years later, and if you read the short book of Nahum, it's a prophecy of the destruction of the Assyrian Empire, namely of Nineveh. So Nineveh at this point has outlived their repentance, and do not repent at Nahum's preaching. Whether or not Nahum actually preached in Nineveh or was preaching about Nineveh, I'm not sure we know the exact answer to that. But so Nahum foretells the destruction of Nineveh sometime around the year 663 to 654 is when and a lot of these dates we'll call them traditional dates, or we can call them conservative dating or things like that. We'll get into some of that with the dating of Daniel as we look at future things regarding that dating. But those are dates that I would be comfortable with for the suggesting when Nahum was writing his prophecy or prophesying about Nineveh. Nahum 1:1 just simply starts the book by saying, the oracle of Nineveh, the book of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. So we are acquainted with Nineveh through the Bible. Nineveh was an important city. It was the capital of Assyria. The city of the city of Nineveh itself. The city walls of Nineveh, it said, were so thick, so big that they had chariot races around the city on the walls of the city itself. And so when you talk about a fortified city, this was not an outpost. This was not even comparable to Jerusalem. This was a big city, and it was very well defended. But Nahum prophesies its destruction. And so how powerful is God? Do the walls scare him? Do the walls say that he's not going to be able to do that? Well, it's interesting to if you go back to the idea of Nineveh, how did Nineveh fall? Well, the armies of Nabopolassar under Nebuchadnezzar were not able to breach the walls of the city. They couldn't get through the walls. But then, wouldn't you know it, the Tigris River flooded. And when the Tigris River flooded, it washed out the foundation of part of one of the walls, and the wall collapsed. And then the army marched right into the city and took it. So, yes, Don.
Footnote that I got on.
Yes, please.
60 miles of wall all the way around.
Uh-huh.
300 feet high, 80 feet thick.
Yeah. I mean, it was, the dimensions of the walls of Nineveh, and many of those things have been excavated to this at this point in history, and those things can be confirmed. I mean, those are not mythical measurements. That's the way it was. Yeah, that's a huge dimension. You can't even fathom that. And if you get into reading, and we won't, because of time, we're not going to do a lot of the reading that I have notes on here. But if you get into the reading Nahum 1 verse 8, it talks about basically there'll be a flood. And then if you read chapter 2 of Nahum, the whole chapter is just about the destruction of the city of Nineveh. And it's graphic. It's just a graphic picture of what's going to happen. And history records that that's exactly what happened. And so Nahum, prophesying 40 years before it happens, tells them what's going to happen. That's why when we talk about the traditional dating and things where we would place the writing of the book of Nahum 40 years before it happened, modern scholars want to place it 30 or 40 years after it happened, because Nahum couldn't have known it happened before. I mean, they don't believe in miracles, and so they have to date those things much later. And so the traditional dating of Nahum is what we'll go with, because that we have no problem believing in the miraculous or the prophetic nature of what he said. With the collapse of the wall, some of the ruling class of Assyria was able to escape before they were murdered, killed, and they tried to establish a new capital for Assyria in the city of Haran, which is right there where the arrow is. So, whoops, wrong button. So there's Nineveh, and they moved to the east, or no, that's west, and they moved to the west, and I was looking at it upside down. They moved to the west, and there's Haran, and established a new capital there, and it fell in 610 BC. So the Babylonian army just followed them to that new capital and destroyed it as well. So we've taken out both capitals now at this point. Historically, next, the most possibly one of the most significant events in secular history of secular armies that battle that have a direct relation to the biblical story would have to be 605 BC, the Battle of Carchemish. In the Battle of Carchemish, we have Pharaoh Necho of Egypt coming up to support Assyria, even though Egypt was a vassal state of Assyria and didn't really have any love for Assyria, staying with what you know, which is being a vassal state of Assyria, has got to be better than being a vassal state for the new guys. So Pharaoh Necho takes his army on the way up the east coast there of the west coast of the land, the east side of the Mediterranean, and takes them up on the way to face off against Nebuchadnezzar's army, and he is aiming to meet them just west of Haran there at Carchemish, and something really weird happens. Justin, what weird thing happens at this point?
Well, the king, one of the good kings, Josiah, who's
the last good king.
The last good king. And he was a young king. He started off pretty young. And even while young, he started in 2 Chronicles 34, I think it's 32 through 34 of his life. He brings out the law and says, hey, look, we found this book, and has a great resurgence. He follows God. He brings the people back to God. But at the end of his life, Josiah decided that fighting against the Egyptians who were going to fight the Babylonians. So that they go up there, and Josiah fights Necho, the Pharaoh of Egypt, for some reason. It says, for some reason, he tried to aid the Babylonians by beating back the Egyptians in Megiddo? Megiddo, there we go, Megiddo.
That's how we'll say it.
In Megiddo. Is that on a map up there, or is that?
It's not, but it is not. It's on the way to Carchemish. It's more in the. It would be more down here, much closer to it'd be kind of somewhere down around in this area, I think. So as the army is marching north to go to try to help Assyria, Josiah says, we'll cut them off at the pass. And the biblical text does not indicate in any way that God told him to do that. In fact, based on the outcome of that battle, I would suggest that Josiah just kind of forgot to ask God's opinion on it. So we're not really given any insight into why Josiah decides this is a good idea. It's one of those kind of weird Bible things that you're left scratching your head and thinking, now I wonder why he did it, and the Bible didn't really tell us why he did it. So it was a bad decision. What happens to Josiah?
Josiah dies.
Josiah dies. He gets hit by Egyptian archers, and 2 Kings just says that he dies, and they take him back to Jerusalem. In 2 Chronicles, it says he's wounded by the archers, and they leave the battlefield in his chariot, and they take him back to Jerusalem, and he dies there and is buried. So either way, as a result of the injuries that he received in that battle, he dies and is buried. And he's the last good king. After that, there are no more good ones. They're all bad. So I don't know how to explain that part of it. I don't know why, other than it just had to happen that way to move the story forward or something. But what would have happened had Josiah counseled with God and asked him, and God said, no, don't go to battle, and Josiah obeyed? well, Babylon was still going to win. Jerusalem was still going to become a vassal state of Babylon. There was no way around the predictions and the prophecies that God had said about Babylon coming to power. That was going to happen. I don't think it needed to happen with Josiah's death. I don't think Josiah needed to die for that to happen. So it's one of those head scratchers that I'm not sure I can explain other than what we've already said. Do you have anything to add to that?
Well, you've been just on a roll for quite a while, been messing up all my jokes. I got some pretty
sorry.
good ones. I was going to say, what were the Ninevites saying when Babylon came to attack them and the walls fell down?
Jericho again? Jericho again? I don't know.
Oh, that's Babylonian.
Oh, that's Babylonian. Oh,
It was pretty good.
Okay.
Anyways,
that's pretty bad.
it was baloney. It was Babylonian. Anyways, I was just going to say, it is interesting that Josiah decided to do this, and then after this, there's a bunch of bad kings, and
Yeah.
there's just very interesting things that you read, in 2 Chronicles at the very end.
Yeah.
So many different things that are happening that add into this, and the destruction of, I guess, the last couple kings, Jehoiakim and Jehoiachin, and all these different ways that the king of Babylon was directly over the people of Israel. And, it says multiple
Yeah.
times in 2 Chronicles 36 that they came and they bound up people and took them with him, and that verse 10 of chapter 36 says that at the turn of the year, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with valuable articles of the house of the Lord. And that's something you see in Daniel,
Yeah.
that the articles that he takes from the temple is robbed, and again, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
I'm getting a little further ahead of you, but the temple is robbed, and all of these things are noted in 2 Chronicles, and then when they show up in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's, I believe it's his son, is going to use some of these articles of the temple in a just to drink wine out of, and to essentially. I don't know what you call that, defile the articles of the temple, and he's
Yeah.
going to be condemned for that. And so there's lots of crossover and the history here. The other joke that I had, again, they're good. I tell you what, there's some pretty good stuff. So right now we're learning about the history of Babylon. What is the town or the nation of Babylon called? The nation of Babylonia? Yeah, the nation.
Babylon.
Well, yeah, but
They are the Babylonians.
yes, but Babylonia, which I'd never heard of, is even referenced in the book of Daniel. Babylonia, which is just an interesting way of putting it. It's Babylonia. And maybe it's...
Well,
just
it's there on the map. It says
Yeah.
Babylonia on the map. I guess I'd always think of it as Babylon.
So Babylonia, and we're reading about the history of Babylonia. And another word for history that we're reading in for the Jews is Chronicles. So we're reading the Chronicles of Babylonia. So, anyways, not the
Yes.
Chronicles of Narnia,
Oh,
the
goodness.
Chronicles of Babylonia.
Okay.
We're done with the jokes. Continuing on.
Just one final thought about Josiah. In 2 Chronicles chapter 35, starting in verse 20, and I don't want to read this whole section because it'll just, I don't want to use the time to read that long of a section, but just notice if you read through there in verse 21, Necho sent messengers to Josiah. What have we to do with each other, O king of Judah? He says, why are you doing this? Why are you coming out against me? I've not attacked you. I'm walking past your kingdom. I'm not coming to do battle with you. And then he says, and now this is Pharaoh Necho of Egypt. I don't know how inspired he is in what he's saying. I don't know if he is speaking truth or if he's just saying what he needs to say to try to get his point across. But he invokes the name of God. He says, God has ordered me to hurry. God has sent me on this mission. Now, I don't think he knows it, but he's going to his death. So maybe God has sent him there, and God is saying, you better get there quick, and I'm not telling you why, but you got a battle to get to, and it's not going to end well for you. But Pharaoh invokes God's name, and then it says in verse 22, however, Josiah would not turn away from him, but disguised himself in order to make war with him, nor did he listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God. Did you catch that? Josiah did not listen to the words of Necho from the mouth of God. So it seems to me that the writer of the Chronicles is saying that the words Necho spoke were from God's mouth. And so Necho was on a God-ordained mission to go to battle against Babylon, and Josiah was standing in his way. So that's an interesting little twist in the story there. Why did Josiah never invokes God's name. Josiah never says, "God's sending me to stop you." Johnny?
God allows a good king to die so that they are not involved in the punishment of what's going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, Hezekiah comes to mind, and we'll talk more about Hezekiah later, because he figures into the story as well, I believe. So, yeah,
But just,
yeah,
he wasn't going to let Josiah see what he was doing to Jerusalem.
and yeah, he didn't want Josiah to be the king that presided over the destruction of the temple, perhaps. And so, because Josiah didn't deserve that. But it's just an interesting twist to the story, and I think we've probably already hammered enough details out of that, or speculated on that enough. But it just intrigues me to think about why Josiah did what he did. Yes, Tim.
Megiddo, that's where we get the word Armageddon.
That's where Armageddon is so as you move into, and a lot of times it's handy to do a kind of a side-by-side comparison of some of the things in Daniel with some of the things in Revelation. And so in the Greek, where it talks about Armageddon, that's the Greek translation of this word Megiddo, which is, so they are the same place. So when John in Revelation is using the kind of the symbolism of the battle that took place in Megiddo, where the last good king of Israel died, and it was a complete slaughter. He's using that as a battle that represents the battle that takes place at the end of the age. So there is some interesting connection there between the historical things that are going on here and even the apocalyptic language of John later. If you go to now, we're not done with Carchemish. This is as I said, it's possibly the most important extra biblical event that takes place certainly during this period of history, but possibly one of the most significant Old Testament events outside of like Bible people doing it, that we come across. So this battle at Carchemish marks the beginning of the 70 years that Jeremiah counts as the 70 years of captivity. This is where Babylon throws off the last vestiges of Assyrian control. Babylon is now in control. They are now the power with this defeat at Carchemish. So in Jeremiah 25, where it says, "This whole land will be a desolation and a horror. These nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. This is when it starts at the battle, with the conclusion of the battle of Carchemish. Then it will be when 70 years are completed, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, declares the Lord, for their iniquity. In the land of the Chaldeans I will make an everlasting desolation." So Babylonians have come in, they've done despicable, terrible, horrible things in winning their battles against the Assyrians, against the Egyptians, and eventually against the Israelites and other nations. And God is going to punish them for the things that they do. But remember, they're only winning because God said they were going to win in the first place. So it's an interesting twist there again. And then a familiar passage from Jeremiah 29. This is the setting for this passage. And we know this verse. You'll know this one when we get to it, verse 11. But the setting is the beginning of the 70 years that happens at the Battle of Carchemish. "For thus says the Lord, when 70 years have been completed for Babylon, I will visit you and fulfill my good word to you to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for calamity, to give you a future and a hope. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you, declares the Lord, and I will restore your fortunes and will gather you from all the nations and from all the places where I've driven you, declares the Lord, and I will bring you back to the place from where I sent you into exile." I mean, that passage, how many times do we use that passage as a passage of comfort and hope? And it originates with the smoking, pillaging, destruction of the Battle of Carchemish in the background. That's where it happens. So just an interesting connection there to some familiar Bible passages. So with the Battle of Carchemish, shortly after that, and my timeline kind of skips a little bit here, but shortly after the Battle of Carchemish, we have the first deportation of people taken from Jerusalem to Babylonian captivity, and that would have included Daniel and his 3 friends. So I think this map, if I go back enough slides, that red dotted line on the map that kind of goes through the middle of it, that's the suspected route that they would take, not just going across, because that's just nasty desert. And so they go up and around and follow the Euphrates River down to the capital of Babylon there. Because even though it's a further journey, it is a much easier journey to go that way than cutting across through the Arabian desert. So so that would be the deportation of the first group of captives, which I thought I had a note on that. There is kind of a momentary lull about the time of the Battle of Carchemish, which Nebuchadnezzar is leading the armies against. He gets word that Nabopolassar, his father, has died. So Nebuchadnezzar kind of has to cut off the battle. Not that he's already won at Carchemish, but he's not quite made his sweep through the land that he would like to make and taken captives from everywhere that he would like to take, because he has to go home and be crowned king. And then he goes home and he's crowned king, and then he comes back. So it's not till about the Battle of Carchemish in 605. It's probably not till about 603 that Daniel and his friends are taken into captivity, because Nebuchadnezzar has to kind of finish some other stuff first. So 597, we have the second deportation of captives to Babylon. That happens because there are some kings that arise that are, remember, they're vassals. They're not truly kings in the sense that we think of like King David or King Solomon. They are kings who are beholden to Nebuchadnezzar. And when they try to assert their own authority or do things without Nebuchadnezzar's approval, he sends an army to discipline them. And so we have Jehoiachin crowned as a king in 2 Kings 24. He lasted 3 months as a king before Nebuchadnezzar sends his army and says, nope, you're not going to cut it. And it's at that point that 10,000 Jews are taken as part of the second deportation, and it's this group in which Ezekiel would have been taken. So we have Daniel going with the first group of deportees, and then Ezekiel going with the second group. In 586, we have the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. So if another final king kind of raises up that decides he's going to defy Nebuchadnezzar, and at this point Nebuchadnezzar says, I've had enough of these people, and he goes in and for about 2 years lays siege to the city of Jerusalem. And when the city finally has had enough and the walls kind of cave in and collapse, Nebuchadnezzar goes in, he destroys the temple, they carry off all the loot, and carry off at this point, anybody who's worth anything is taken on into captivity. The only people that are left are the poorest of the society. And so not much is left behind, although Jeremiah stays behind. And so we have all of those things taking place in 2 Kings 25, 2 Chronicles 36. In 536, the fall of the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire. And so, again, a historical thing that's taking place that doesn't, I mean, these aren't biblical peoples. Babylon and the Medes and the Persians are not our heroes of the story, but they're the secular rulers that are kind of playing their games, their war games and everything, and the Medo-Persian Empire comes into being. King Darius releases the Jews, and a remnant returns to Jerusalem to begin rebuilding the temple. Guess how long it's been, by the way, at this point? 70 years. That's Daniel chapter 9. When Daniel realizes, oh, it's been 70 years. I wonder if something's about to happen. And sure enough, it does. So the things that are taking place here with the crowning of Darius and those things beginning to take place, we see those chronicled in the book of Ezra, in Haggai, and in Zechariah, talking about the rebuilding of Jerusalem. There's a map. Oh, the Medo-Persian Empire, that's why I put that in there. So you'll notice the maps are all very similar. because one kingdom comes in and takes over the other kingdom, and they get the same area, right? I mean, if I take you over, I get all your stuff, and if you were in charge of this area, then I get all that area. So the kingdoms are all very similarly sized and proportioned when you talk about the Assyrians and the Babylonians and then the Medo-Persian Empire.
Alex comes in.
And then we get this guy. And so in 334 to 327, Alexander the Great, who by all accounts was possibly the greatest military leader that ever lived. He conquers vast swaths of land in a shorter amount of time than anybody has ever done. And he just rolls through an entire empire that people thought would never be defeated. So Alexander the Great, and Daniel is going to prophesy about him. So we have Daniel prophesying between the year 605 to 636, or 536, during that time frame, and Alexander the Great doesn't come around for another 250 years. And so Daniel is talking about things that are so far off into the future. I mean, the weatherman can't get it right 5 days from now, but Daniel got it right 250 years later. He got it right 500 years later. About the details of kingdoms that were going to come and go, and the way that they would come and go. And so these are all just significant events for us to have kind of a reference for and understand when we get to these things in Daniel to be just in awe of the things that God is telling his people before they ever take place. In 323, Alexander the Great dies. That's the kingdom of Alexander the Great. It looks very familiar, doesn't it? It's basically the Persian Empire. I mean, he takes over all of Persia and everything that they had conquered. And so even goes a little bit further east than Persia had gone, all the way to India. Actually, significantly further east than they had gone, all the way into India. So in 323, Alexander the Great dies, and Daniel has prophesied that when that great leader dies, that has taken over all these things, his kingdom would be divided into 4 pieces. Guess what happens when Alexander the Great dies? Well, Daniel told us what was going to happen. It's divided into 4 pieces. And so you have the 4 kingdoms that make up that whole area that Alexander had ruled. The yellow there is the Seleucids. The red is the Ptolemies. The brown area there is the Lysimachus. I think that's what that says, Lysimachus. And then the green would be the kingdom of Cassander, often just referred to as Macedonia, in that region. So, significant areas for what we're going to read about in future Bible history and New Testament history as well. But Alexander had control of all that. When he died at a young age, he didn't have an heir. He didn't have anybody to take over for him, and it was just divided up amongst his 4 generals. And then finally, we have the Roman Empire established in 27 BC. And guess what Daniel had said was going to happen after those 4 empires kind of crumble? Well, there's going to be one empire that comes in and takes over those 4. And here it is. It's the Roman Empire. And so, the empire of the Persians plus a whole lot more area gets taken over by the Roman Empire. So all of those things are significant historical things that we can put actual dates to. I mean, we can look back in the history dates. We can look back at museums. The British Museum is full of cuneiform writings and tablets and records that have been collected from all of these various kingdoms. And they all confirm all the things that happen here. And Daniel told us about those things hundreds of years before they ever happened. And so, it's important for us to have a grasp of that history, not because it's just fun history to know, which it is, by the way, but it's because it relates word for word significantly to the Bible text. And if we don't know that history, think of what we lose with our appreciation for or our faith in the text itself by not understanding how the history of the things that unfolded relate to that text. It's more than just a story. It's more than a fairy tale. It is not mythological. It is telling the story that's going to happen before it ever happens. And that is faith building. That is significant for us as Christians. Okay? Are you convinced? So we need to study Daniel, and we need to have a clue of what those things in Daniel are pointing to as we read through the book. Okay, so real quick, the last half of the outline in the next 6 minutes. Daniel the man. Who is Daniel?
The man.
He is the man. His name means God is my judge. I don't know why we're always so interested in knowing what the names of people in the Bible mean. Maybe it goes back to when God changed the names of Abraham and Sarah and some others, that he changed their names so that it fit more with his purpose for them, and that gives us a feeling of significance for what the meaning of people's names is. What does Justin mean? Do you even know?
I was going to say tall, dark, and handsome, but I'm
that's not it.
Short, pale, and all right. Yeah, I know. They got them all.
Well, Jason means healer, and I'm currently coughing and sick, so I don't know what that means. All right, so God is my judge is the meaning of his name. That's great. I don't know that there's a lot of significance to that. Some commentators would probably talk about how, God judges Daniel through the book as being faithful and those kind of things, and maybe it's there for a reason. But Daniel definitely is a man of deep faith, and we can quickly read a couple of these passages. Maybe you and Daniel?
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel 1:8. Daniel's a man of deep faith in deeds.
Daniel 1:8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Okay,
so we'll get into discussion of some of these passages when we get to those things as we study through the text. Not a lot of commentary on those tonight, but Daniel trusted God's plan. He wasn't going to do things the way his captors told him he had to do them. He was going to do the things the way his God told him to do them. And that's a statement of faith.
Which is interesting, because basically you do anything they don't like, they kill you. I mean,
right.
The result of both of these things is, okay, well, we might kill you, or he'll kill me. In chapter 1, the guy's like, if I do this for you, they might kill me. And so it's not like, I'm just not going to do what you tell me. No, it's do it or die.
Right.
And he has the faith to say, you know what, I'm going to do what God says.
Exactly. Daniel was rewarded by God for his faith. 2:47-48.
47, the king answered Daniel and said, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and he became ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon.
How do you account for a young man taken into captivity, presumably against his will? I don't think Daniel's probably lining up as a volunteer saying, yeah, I'll go to Babylon. He's being taken from his family. He's been taken from his place he's known all his life. He's taken into captivity. He's told how he's going to serve. And because of the way that he serves, he ends up being appointed as a ruler. I mean, how do you account for that if God is not behind it, if God is not blessing him through this? And so we see God rewarding Daniel constantly through the book for his faithfulness. Daniel is a contemporary of Jeremiah and Ezekiel, which gives us three interesting perspectives. We have Daniel serving in the king's court and giving us that perspective and the behind-the-scenes things that are going on in the court of all of those kings that he serves, not just Nebuchadnezzar, but future kings as well. We have Jeremiah giving us the perspective from Jerusalem, and all that chapter 1 of Jeremiah says is that he was in Jerusalem. And then we have Ezekiel, who is in Babylon, but he's there as a captive among the exiles. He is not living the life of luxury, perhaps, as you might think that Daniel is living, although Daniel's life is at constant, under constant threat. But Ezekiel is having a much harder time of things in the captivity in which he lives than Daniel does. So we have these three different perspectives that are all taking place concurrently with one another and giving us their view of the things that are unfolding in God's plan. So one commentator, Rex Turner, wrote, that is, Daniel became the hub, so to speak, of a prophetic circuit with Jeremiah in the homeland, him in the court of Nebuchadnezzar, and Ezekiel among the captives in Babylon. What providence! God had not forgotten his nation, nor had he forgotten his people of the Gentile nations. And so Daniel serves as sort of the hub of that circuit of prophets that we think of with Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Really, when it comes down to it, we don't know a whole lot about Daniel. Other than the things that we read about him in his own book, we don't have a lot of other biblical passages about him. We have a few, and we'll look at a couple of them here in just a minute. But we really don't know a lot. We know that he was young. Commentators estimate his age between 12 and 20 years old. That's kind of a wide range, but probably fairly accurate, I would think. He was in some way related to the royal family, most likely a descendant of one of the former kings. Speculatively, we would put him as a descendant of Hezekiah because of this passage, or these two passages. Isaiah 39 and 2 Kings 20 are identical passages. They read exactly the same words. So go ahead and read that, would you?
Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and all that your fathers have laid up in store to this day will be carried to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord, and some of your sons will issue from you, whom you will beget, will be taken away, and they will become officials in the palace of the kings of Babylon." So
it was foretold to Hezekiah. And remember, Hezekiah had committed a sin when he took the Babylonian officials in and showed them all of his stuff. And it's like, why did you do that? Why did you show your future enemy all of the treasure that you have in your kingdom? That was a bad move. How did Nebuchadnezzar know that he could go to Jerusalem and tear that city apart and find a lot of treasure? Well, somebody had told him, hey, when we went to Jerusalem, we saw a lot of treasure, right? And so that was not a good thing for Hezekiah to do. And as a punishment, it was said, well, all this stuff's going to be taken from you by the Babylonians, including some of your own descendants. And then Hezekiah's response to that is, well, at least it won't happen during my life. That's a mature attitude, I suppose. By the way, does anybody else maybe have a different version that reads something other than the word officials? Were you reading along in your scriptures? If you have a New American Standard, it says officials. If you have any other thing, it says something else. Oh, no, I'm not going to wait on you to look it up. It says eunuchs. And some commentators are adamant that Daniel and his companions were made physical eunuchs. I don't know that I have an opinion on that matter. I don't want to be adamant about anything as trivial as that for myself, but well, I suppose it was significant to them, but it was trivial to my understanding of the text. But it seems possible. It's certainly possible that they were made eunuchs. Nothing is said of Daniel ever marrying or having children. So that would be explained if he were a eunuch. So Jeremiah was forbidden to marry or have children. Ezekiel had a wife, but he was forbidden to mourn when she passed away. And so we have some different perspectives there again from those prophets during that same time frame. And so, we made it most of the way through.
Yeah, check out. Go one more.
One
slide.
more. Okay, so
No, okay, go
one.
one
Okay.
slide
Oh,
blank.
you did it. Okay, you did something. All right.
Well, yeah, I tried to
You
add
did a
in.
thing.
I tried to add in. So my deal, I was going to put a steer on there because he's the
It's a
prize
eunuch.
steer. Daniel is the prize steer. Now,
He's a
granted,
eunuch, okay.
he might have been a
Few
eunuch or not,
details.
but anyway,
All right.
anyway.
So
We'll get there next week.
If we some of those passages are the few times that Daniel is mentioned outside of his own book. We have Ezekiel saying that he was a righteous man. We have Ezekiel calling him a wise man, and then we have Jesus calling him a prophet in Matthew 25. We're referring to Daniel as a prophet. So what we know of Daniel outside of his own book is all good. In fact, I think I've heard it preached before that Daniel is one of the very few, if not only, significant Bible characters that we have that nothing negative is ever said about him. I mean, think about the great Bible characters. Think about Peter. Think about David. Think about Moses. Think about Abraham. Think about any of the great Bible characters other than Jesus, and there's something in their story that is bad. But not with Daniel. We don't ever read anything negative of Daniel. Chuck?
Wasn't he one of them that was mentioned of the three? If this person, this person, this person. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
They could only save themselves.
yeah. Job and Daniel and, who's the other one? Job, Daniel, and Elijah, or Elisha, or somebody. Yeah, and I'm not sure if it's one of those passages or not, to be honest with you, I can't remember. But, yes, yeah, he was numbered as one of the three greats. And it may not have been the three that you would think of, like you would think of Moses, David, and Abraham or something, but it's not necessarily three that you would think of as being the greats. Yeah, there's your blank slide.
Well, it didn't get saved in there. I was driving on the way in
wonder
here.
how
I put
that
a nice
happened.
steer up there because this is what verse 4 of Daniel 1 says. It says, this is whom he's looking for. Youths
All right.
in whom was no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding, discerning knowledge, the ability for serving in the king's court. He ordered them to teach them literature in the language of the Chaldeans. So Daniel's the prize steer. He's being
Blue
shown
ribbon,
off.
purple
He's-
ribbon.
Well, yeah, with the purple, I mean, the best of the best. He's the prize, and he's also a steer. Anyways,
Okay. Well, we can pick up, or you can
Yeah.
pick up next week a little bit just about the book. There's not a whole lot there about it, but, and then move on into the text next week.
keep
Thank
talk-
you.
You keep talking about all these commentators. I wonder where the uncommentators went.